Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I prefer POIs in the chat. And
sorry. Before you start, I'm so sorry. Panel, I think you should introduce yourself just to make sure everyone is here. Sorry for that. Panel, you could introduce yourselves.
Claudia.
Hi, Uday, Milo Neutral.
All right. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to start the debate here.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. The status quo in the country of Colombia is unsustainable. Drug cartels run rampant. Bribery and corrupt officials are the standards, and the murder rates are of the highest in the world. The definition of the drug business as illegal is clearly failing in Colombia. My mech, and then the points of my speech, which are, first of all, legalizing drugs will gradually change the current cartels into legitimate businesses, as has happened in the past with legalization of tobacco and alcohol companies after prohibition in the United States. Secondly, why there will be significantly less violence in Colombia as a result. And thirdly, if I have the time, what the comparative is and why on the opposite, a bunch of people in Colombia are still using drugs. So how does this look? We are going to be legalizing all drugs. This includes cocaine, meth, and heroin, and all the like. Please note that given the status quo in Colombia, what's actually going to change is mostly the legalization of cocaine, because that is the majority of the market. Let's go into my first point. Legalizing drugs will gradually change the current cartels into legitimate businesses. Note that the incentive of these cartels is one. It is to earn money. They would prefer, if they could, to work legally, because that just makes things a lot easier. They don't have to put in resources into covert operations and bribe officials and do all those things. Note that when this is illegal, everyone knows that it is dangerous. This means that the employees, i.e. the workers, the people that are in those cartels, are people who are attracted to illegal acts. This means that violent people are those that are going to be in these companies in ops world. Few mechs on why this is the case. Once you legalize, why legalizing this will turn them into legitimate businesses. Once you legalize this, you don't need to corrupt officials, make officials corrupt and bribe them like you have to do on ops side. You don't have to work outside the law. You don't have to, blackmail people into working for you and threaten their families and children, all those things. Secondly, you don't have to fight over limited resources with other cartels like corrupt officials. Just when this thing becomes legal, then you can work within the boundaries of the law together with other cartels, just like the alcohol and the tobacco business work today. Thirdly, you have your actual buildings and factories and territory written in the city database, written in the municipality. There is no reason to fight over territory because the police and the army will work with you rather than against you in protecting that and letting you have your own property. And fourthly, you don't have to fight over customers because it's just much more cost effective as that business to advertise to customers against your competitors rather than agreeing on boundaries with other companies. Just like we saw with the prohibition, alcohol companies don't need to shoot up the other alcohol companies in order to win. What are the impacts that we get from this? Well, first of all, you get to tax these huge corporations. Think of Colombia as a place where the salary and there is a large issue of poverty in that country. Once the government can get taxes, then they can help the poor and they can provide them much better social services and health services. Secondly, you get less corruption. The fact that you no longer need to bribe the police as these cartels means that you have better and more effective policing, and therefore you have more trust of people in the government. This means that the police can actually catch those who murder and steal and cheat, and instead of worrying about helping the cartels and what that means with losing their jobs potentially. Thirdly, you're going to have people, just a less violent Colombia. I'm going to expand on this more in my next point. And fourthly, and very importantly, drugs are going to become safer. The fact that this is now legal means you'll have public regulation of drugs. It is in the interest of the government to be publicly regulate and of those companies to be publicly regulated in order to prove to their customer base that they are safe, because consumers want safe drugs. Therefore, both sides want this regulation and it will therefore happen. Also, in addition to this, the fact that they are legal companies means that they can share knowledge online between themselves, or have people go from one company to another and share that knowledge on how to make this thing as safe as possible. This means that also as the consumer, I can find information online about which drug it will be the safest and the least addictive to me. Note that this will beat opposition on the metrics that they are going to propose of the dangers of drugs and how addiction is rampant, because once you have safer drugs, then you don't have that problem as much on our side. Second point, why is there going to be significantly less violence? The reality of cartels working illegally in Colombia means that you have cartel war. In the status quo, cartels are fighting and hurting each other, and through that, civilians and cops in their ways, because they have to get resources that are under the status quo illegal. Think about the properties of this war. First of all, you have a lot of third-party harms, because you have things like drive-by shootings and bombs that are blown up. They are incredibly violent. They blow up facilities and blow up schools and things like that in order to harm the territory of the other side. And thirdly, they are never ending. There is no one cartel that controls everything. And this war is making Colombia lose tons of money and human lives and endangering civilians. Under our side of the motion, we will have much less violence between the cartels, because we will have much more of these resources. Territory is something that the government won't it becomes a lot easier to find land in a controlled territory because it's legal. You don't have to make drugs, and it's a lot easier to do it because the government doesn't try to stop you all the time. You don't have to shoot at the government and shoot at the cops. You don't need guns anymore because you are working legally. And you have it's a lot easier to get manpower if you are working within the boundaries of the law. Before I move on, I'll take a POI from closing. Moving on. What is the comparative? Well, people are still going to be using a lot of drugs. Think of the United States during the Prohibition, in the 20s, when they tried to legalize, make alcohol illegal. That didn't move a thing. Why? Because there is still a market and there is a lot of money involved. Even when it is illegal in the status quo, the drug business is worth billions. In Colombia is earned by projections, because it's illegal, we can't know exactly how much it makes, but by projections it is making more than the Colombian government itself. Note that it is easy to get drugs even on opposition side in the status quo, because A, it's very accessible. You have dealers spread out through the entirety of Colombia. B, people still want drugs. Thirdly, the poverty in Colombia and the things that drive people to get drugs, and the sadness in their life and the difficulties of dealing with reality are still there in the status quo. And fourthly, culturally, people know other people that use drugs. It is a lot easier and a lot less of a boundary and a leap to get to that. What is the bottom line of this? Opposition's impact of less people who are addicted to drugs is going to be marginal at best, but we show you both safer drugs, less violence, and more tax money. For all those reasons, we are proud to propose.
All right, we thank that speaker for that speech. We now welcome the opposition leader to begin the case of the opening opposition. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. Just one moment, please. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 points in my speech. Firstly, why this massively hurts your own citizens at the point where they're going to become much more addicted to drugs, at the point where you're going to shrink your economy, people are going to suffer, people are going to die at a much higher rate than they do today. And secondly, why this basically prevents any trade with you from other countries, because other countries are not going to trust you, which will make it impossible for you to do that. One thing, though, in terms of framing, which is also a quite significant rebuttal to opening opposition, because opening government, because opening government tell us, that Colombia is a hellhole, drug cartels are looming around, the government basically has no way to stop them, and all of the people are bribed there. We think this is untrue. It probably used to be true in the past, but here are several reasons why it's probably untrue today. Firstly, we think that Colombia used to be a country which exports drugs to a lot of other countries like America, countries like in Europe, countries like Israel. They have they're very much positioned in a good position in South whatever, in a good position in the world, such as they're able to export those drugs with plane to just crossing them over the border to America and that kind of stuff. This gives a huge incentive to America to actually use its military, to use its capacity to bring the DEA into Colombia to help the Colombians get rid out of the drugs, right? How does this look like? Probably the DEA making covert operations, uses the intelligence to figure out where are the drug cartels moving, sending its agents to stop them, right? Because they don't like drug. Look, America fucking killed Pablo Escobar, the biggest baron of the Colombian cartels. We think that they are doing the same to keep holding the drugs, right? They tell you they can just bribe officials. The Americans are going to probably find out about this and stop this from doing that anymore. We don't think that Colombia is such a hellhole today. But even that, then we think that the drug cartels are pretty weak, right? Because they constantly fight with each other, as opening governments say, because that means that they are constantly shrinking down, because instead of cooperating, they are destroying each other when fighting over territories, which means that they are rather small. That this is not the problem. One more point of rebuttal before that. They say that you are going to reduce violence, but we don't think that's true, because you still need to export drugs to other countries. You still need to do illegal activities. We don't think that's true. But secondly, just on account of like limited resources, we don't think that they're actually limited resources. They just prefer to shoot up each other up, even though they don't have to, right? They don't have to fight over territory. I could be working in this city, you could be working in the next city, but in order for them to expand, they want to take control of the others. They can still do that on both sides of the house. They never give an incentive why you shouldn't do that. Then let's continue to why drugs are so harmful and how we can stop them on our side. A couple of things we note here. Firstly, you have the military and the police, which can do patrols, which can catch people that actually do drugs, right? They can do checkups on them. They can try to search them with drugs. They can roll into parties. Also, at the point where you have the help of the DEA, which has lots of intelligence, and like America is very powerful, and you're able to catch those drug sentences, right? You send people to a tremendous amount of time to jail at the point where you catch them. If you're caught dealing, you're sent to 20 years of jail. If you're caught just using, you're probably sent to something like 5 years of jail, right? You're also, a lot of time you cannot distinguish between the cases. So even if you're caught with drugs, you don't know if you're dealing or just wanting to use them for personal gain. At this point, you are afraid that you're going to be sent for the longer sentence, right? You're very scared of that. But also, it's very easy to prosecute and catch those culprits, because at the point where you catch them with drugs, this is essentially hard evidence which you can actually present in court. They're very much to blame in instances. You can do a blood test to test if they're high right now, and you can catch them, right? We think that police is actually doing a very fine job, right? But that means that people are even afraid to try them in the first place, like normal citizens, right? Because they care for their livelihood. They don't want to be sent to 20 years in prison. They're very scared, even if they won't be caught, they're just scared of the notion that it could happen. So they are preventing themselves from doing that in the first place, right? But when it is legal, then firstly, companies don't need to hide that from the law, right? They don't need to fight the police, and people aren't scared of taking that because there is no prison sentence. That means people are going to take that much less. But secondly, because it's now cheaper to produce, because you don't have all of the other maintenance costs like fighting the police and stuff, which means that drugs are cheaper, that people inside Colombia are going to buy them more. But thirdly, and most crucially, and this is again with engagement with open government, is that now we can use advertising to advertise your product to other people. Opening government tell us that, oh, they're just going to make healthy drugs because consumers want healthy drugs. A couple of responses to that. How? Drugs is something that is inherently addictive. I don't see how you can make them better by just doing research. But secondly, I don't see why you have an incentive, because at the point where people are addicted, you know that they're going to buy it the next time, right? We think that you can probably make up for the addiction by using extremely sophisticated marketing strategy, by sort of marketing as this as the new experience of life. You haven't experienced life if you didn't try this, right? They can probably use psychological tricks that they use from research in order to make that thing, those advertising that effective. This is why the majority of people in the world fucking drink Coca-Cola, even though all people in the world know that Coca-Cola is harmful to you, because they can sell you that with advertisement that make people want to buy it and ignore the other downsides of it. Why is this so harmful? Firstly, because drugs are very, very bad for you. You cannot opt out of using the drugs after you've used it for the first time, because it has such strong chemicals on your brains. Because you really don't have a choice in that matter. You don't control your action because they're so strong. Secondly, it hurts your health tremendously. You keep needing more and more higher dosage, because this is how the addictive nature of your drug. Eventually, you're even likely to overdose if you at the point where you can't stop, and you're unlikely to be able to stop if someone doesn't catch you and physically prevent you from doing drugs. At the point where we give you a choice to do that, you're stopping, but you won't stop. But thirdly, it just gives you tremendous amount of suffering and pain, right? I'll take Seiji now.
Don't you think that it would be possible to just not let those legalized industries advertise, similar to the fact that cigarette industries are not allowed to advertise today in a lot of countries?
Firstly, I do think that cigarettes industry are allowed to advertise. Secondly, I gave you another more mechanism as to why you're likely to just buy more drugs, and even if it's not like direct advertising, it probably is much easier on your side of the house. It causes immense suffering and pain to the people that don't have this. And certainly you just didn't make this, so OG didn't make this, so I'm unsure that this is going to happen. It causes immense suffering at the point where you don't use the drug. Yeah, you use the drug for 1 second, and as soon as the effect stops, you really suffer a lot of pain, because that's how they worked in order to try to get you more. Why are other countries not likely to trade for you? Because it's still illegal in other countries, and Colombia is a very well placed to trade from, right? We think that they have natural resources like oil and that kind of stuff. At a point where Colombia itself is not going to try to prevent those drug shipments going to other countries, then in its borders, then the other countries are afraid. They don't trust it. They don't know if the business is legit or not when they trade with Colombia, because they know it's legal. It could be just a shell company. On the comparative, when they know that Colombia actually tries to stop it, they're much more secure in it that it's not going to be drugs. We are so proud to oppose this motion.
All right, we thank that speaker for that speech. We now welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to conclude the case of opening government. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so wait, ordering my pages. Okay, so I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Look, during the year of 2019, the Colombian chief of command were publicly murdered by Colombian cartels. We don't think the opposition can do anything to try to prove us that, oh no, the situation in Colombia is stable, those cartels are small and they don't have enough power. We believe that the situation of Colombia is a huge mess. Okay, so they come and say, oh, they have incentives to not have this mess. The US have incentives and power. Okay, so sure, the US gives money, but the US still sees the Colombian cartels as the fault of the Colombian breaking government. They see them. The US does not see themselves as the ones to blame. So they won't send so easily the entire army of the US to try to save the Colombian government, because they believe that the Colombians are the one to fault. They won't have the political approval in the US to send their sons, to send their commanders, to send their people to die in Colombia because of those cartels. So we think it's likely to assume they give some money, not that much money, but they definitely not sending their boots on the ground and kill every Colombian cartels ever, because they don't have such huge incentives. Their incentives tells them, okay, so we need to keep our borders in the US, and that's what they do the best, right? Trump builds a wall, right? Trump's have a better borders to Mexico than Obama did. That's what the US do. That's what Europeans do. They don't send people to Colombia to find the cartels, and even if they some part of history killed Pablo Escobar, they don't do this systematically. They don't spend all their resources there. They don't gonna send their sons to suicide missions in Colombia. We got only the incentives, but I showed you that the US has a better solution to this. Just strengthen their borders. It's much easier. It's much more beneficial. It's much more less dying sons of their military under their side of the motion. So they are likely to save, not sending there. Okay, but please note that any explanation that we got from the opening opposition does not change the fact that the Colombia has the highest murder rate in the world. So trying to claim that the Colombia is not in a major crisis is not something you can do in this debate. This does not change the fact that cartels keep killing civilians and cops, trying to stop them, trying to living their life because they want their territory, because they want their resources, because they want their money to try to bribe any government official to try to steal any more guns to start their business as a cartels. We give you a comparative of which why they gonna spend much less money, because now they need less money, they need less resources to start their business, because now they won't have to steal it, now they won't have to fight over land, now they won't have to fight over officials they need to bribe, now they won't have to fight over manpower, they need to do very illegal stuff. Their job will be much easier, much more easier controlled, and much more economical. So we think we don't get any engagement by this with this idea by opening opposition. And regarding the idea the cartels are shrinking, this is absolutely lie. We don't get any explanation why cartels are shrinking, because no one fights them well. They are just growing because more people consume drugs in the US, because more people consume drugs all over the world. They want to export these drugs. And about Pablo Escobar, look, every time that one cartel is split, it's worse for Colombia. When Pablo Escobar died, his cartel split up to 3 cartels that to this day fight themselves. And when they fight, it's a mess. When they fight, it's a lot of violence. It hurts. They hurt civilians. They murder officials. They bribe officials, and they fight over land in which civilians live in, which makes more and more death in cops and in civilians. And we don't think we can say in this debate that Colombia is not a mess. Okay, I forgot to do a roadmap. So my rest of my speech gonna be why number 1 of Colombia problem is instability, and why we won't have new drug user. So look, why the number 1 problem of Colombia is instability? Because it requires stability to solve all other problems, right? Because stability stops them from handling the other problem. We think that this problem is more important than money. It's more important than international affairs. It's more important than having non-addicted citizens, because all those problems will be able to address, will be able to have some regulation, will be able to change once we have a functioning government that have manpower, have the cops, have the power over manpower that can make all the other regulation and law happen, then can make this better. And we're gonna get this only once we have a functioning government.
Did you have chance?
I'll take a CO.
Yes, look, by turning the cartels legal, you are actually empowering them, because now they have way more customers.
Okay, so great. This leads me to my second argument, why they won't have much newer customer. Because please note, Colombia is so unstable, so the order of the law is very fragile. What does it mean? It's easy to get drugs. Government does not try to do so much to stop you. All of them are busy handling those cartels and more severe violence that is caused by those cartels. They need to handle the cartel. First, they don't have enough resources like guns, like manpower, like time, like attention. They can't handle all those cartels. So it's very easy, it's very hard for them to stop you for using drugs. And about, more people they're gonna do commercial. Okay, please note, I cannot live in Colombia without knowing about drugs. I will probably know drug exists. I will probably gonna consume them if I want. We don't think we have much new customers under our side of the house. The people that want drug gets drugs. I call you to propose.
Right, we thank that speaker for that speech. We now welcome the Deputy Opposition Leader to conclude the case of opening opposition. Here.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you stop the clock, I think?
Yeah, I'll do that.
3, 2, 1. 1 point of framing. One point of framing, and then I was going to extend on Yuval's points about how in the status quo Colombia actually stops and can further shrink the cartels. And later I will speak about how it will, I will extend how it will affect the economy of Colombia to the worst. Now, the point of framing, which is actually a large role in OG's case, is that these cartels, as they claim, they're not really afraid of the law currently. They're not afraid of getting out with murder, with bribe, and with dealing with drugs, heavy crimes. What it means that in their world, in the world after the motion, they won't be afraid to don't pay taxes. They won't be afraid to avoid regulations. They won't be afraid to still continue with the territory wars. Meaning, OG's case really doesn't stand at the point that they don't prove you a large enough difference. Maybe they will pay a little bit more taxes, but most of the taxes will be evaded. Maybe they will do a little less crimes, but most of it will be evaded. Now, what I'll continue to the first one. About how currently the cartels can be stopped. Now, notice that OG's case is a bit, I think it's based on narcos. I don't know if they are basing it on real facts or not, because this is not how Colombia actually runs. The Colombian economy grew up a lot in the past, 20 years, and it keeps going. It goes because the stability there, it keeps going. Why does it happen, besides what Yuval gave you? It happens because Colombia has a lot of allies in the world. It has a lot of Western allies that dealt a lot with crime cartels in their country. Now, these countries don't have to bring Colombia their officers. They can just train their officials how to fight drug cartels or crime cartels better. And notice that crime cartels operate the same in every country. Maybe in Colombia they do drugs, and in other countries they do, I don't know, just like a protection man. But the same thing applies to all, is that they operate covertly, they bribe people, and these are things that countries can actually learn. The second thing that they can bring them is intelligence equipment that is crucial for fighting these crimes. And notice the intelligence equipment keeps getting better and better each year, meaning that each year that passes, the government has easier times to fight these cartels. Now notice that even if you don't accept my point, at the point that OG's analysis agrees with us about the fact that in today's world the cartels have to face a lot of things that make their operations a lot harder. Things like bribing people, things like operating in secret, things like you need to, keep your stash in places that are farther away from the police, stuff that are more expensive. It makes the dealing of drugs and creating drugs less efficient, less viable option, meaning less people will do it, meaning it will be harder to produce a lot of drugs. And because of it, it means that in their world, the drugs will just be stronger. This in addition to the large community that will add, as Yuval explained to you, by commercials and applying to new crowds that maybe previously wanted but didn't want as much, or new crowds that didn't want, and because the commercial now want. Now, how it will affect the economy of Colombia? Now, Yuval started explaining it. Now, I think that a lot of countries are afraid of drugs going into the country. It doesn't have to be the US, it has to be every country that is not for drugs. At the point that Colombia is the only country that legalizes drugs, and it has such a massive production, this is the point where countries actually feel that the Colombian drugs will come inside like a legitimate Colombian products. How does it look like, this film? it looks like Colombian products are held more in the border for checkings. It looks like people that are dealing with Colombia getting more inspected for drugs than usual. This is a lot of bureaucratic hassle and a lot of reasons why not to deal with Colombia for businessmen locally. On extreme cases in conservative countries, we may see even trade barriers with Colombia. Now, why is it? What does it do in this debate? It means that for these businessmen, it's less optimal to trade with Colombians. They are better choosing the products of other countries. Now, why is it so important? It's right because it hurts the Colombian economy vastly. Why? Because Colombia is a rather poor country. Most of the money comes from outside, meaning that if the export trade of Colombia gets hurt, a lot of the Colombian economy are getting hurt. I will take CG if they have something, and if not, CO.
Yes, one thing I was going to ask is if you agree that as American intelligence gets better, guerrilla warfare techniques of evading that intelligence also gets better. And if you don't agree, then why is the US pulling out?
Thank you. Honestly, I can't think about it in this second. I'm sorry. Too complex here, in my opinion. Now, what do we bring to you in this debate? Why bring to you in this debate? We bring to you improvement of the Colombian economy, both by the export and by less people are addicted to drugs. Now, notice that OG's case told the drugs will be safer, but I want to state this thing doesn't really work that way, right? People don't search online, what's the safest drugs I can take to that? They search online, what's the most fun drug I can take to that? And at the point where they are already addicted and they don't have a lot of money, they will go for the cheapest drug, not the safest drug, meaning their point of safety doesn't stand as well. Now, at the point where a lot of people are addicted to drugs, it means that they can less engage in the economy and the economy is hurt. So we both bring to you damage to the Colombian economy, something that is really bad for the Colombians, and we both bring to you the social harms of somebody that is addicted to drugs and now has no money and now has no way of engaging with society in a full way. We call you to oppose this motion. Thank you.
All right, we thank that speaker for that speech. We are now headed to the closing half of the debate, and I would like to welcome the member of government to open the case of closing government. Here.
Thank you. Let me just set a timer real quick for myself. All right. So far on the government side, we've heard that Colombia is war-torn right now, which we agree with. And on the opposition side, we've basically heard justification for the 1970s drug war. And because of this, I think it's apt to kind of reframe the debate right now through a quick refresher on history. So when the US actually fought the drug cartels in Colombia, they didn't do it directly because they didn't want to spend American lives fighting a war in another country. So what they did was they provided intelligence through the DEA, which opening opposition would have you believe is a great strategy towards solving the drug crisis in Colombia. But what they did, more importantly, is they funded armed guerrilla groups, idealistic groups to fight those cartels. And here is where the key reframing of this debate takes place. And it is that right now, in the 21st century in Colombia, the greatest threat is not cartels, albeit they exist, albeit they're a problem. It is the idealistic, highly extremist leftist and rightist political groups that are armed, are paramilitary, and use to a margin of 70 or 80% get all of their funding from the drug trade. And so in this speech, I'm going to bring you two unique extensions, which have not been mentioned first. The first one is the idea that paramilitary groups are the biggest threat to Colombia right now. And by legalizing all drugs and in a sense, removing their main source of funding, we are essentially combating the #1 security threat in the country. Extension number 2, which I don't believe has been brought up yet, but please correct me if that's not the case, is that with legalizing all drugs, rehabilitation will be much more widespread, it'll be legal, and people will be able to benefit from government-run rehab programs. So the first one, there have been historical groups like FARC, AUC, who had 70–80% of their funding come from the drug war. They carry out political assassinations, but the more important thing is that they are nothing like cartels when you draw a parallel between them. And that is exactly what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to contrast them. So cartels primarily were community-based. And as opening opposition said, and also opening government agreed with, I believe, is they are businesses. And so what they did in terms of their own political ambitions and meddling with local politics was only so far as to enable themselves to run a more effective business. They did not necessarily associate themselves with extremist or idealist political movements. And so in that regard, they were not a threat because of the fact that they could be appeased. The government was able to strike deals with cartels. They still are. They're able to be more negligent in certain parts of the drug trade, and then they, promote a more stringent level of safety and social regulation because of informal or formal deals with the cartel. This is something that is impossible to do with political paramilitary groups because of the fact that their sole purpose has nothing to do with the drug war itself. The drug war is only a way of financing an ulterior motive, which is to promote, extremist fascist belief or authoritarian communist beliefs in, as OG already said, what is a very war-torn country right now. So some examples of this, AUC historically has carried out different types of ethnic cleansing. They routinely assassinate priests. And overall, they create a society which is war-torn. They exacerbate already existing political polarization in the country. They dissuade people from participating in the local political process because they see that it is bound to political violence, social violence, and they normalize the idea that if you have a particular belief in a form of government, that you can go out and take arms for it and kill priests and carry out political assassinations. And this is exactly why we should do everything we can to eliminate this threat, the number one threat. I'll take your POI now.
Look, the cartels that you're talking about are also committing other crimes. The fact that you deal with one thing means that the other things still exist.
Yes. Absolutely. But what I've just spent the past 4 minutes and a half explaining through also explaining the chronology of the drug war is that cartels are no longer the number one issue. And so the point is cartels are now a minority of the drug trade in Colombia because of the fact that the US financed these extremist groups who now own the majority of it. And so the whole argument that we've heard from opening opposition saying that the US will provide resources, the US will provide intelligence, does not hold up simply because of the fact that this is exactly what they did in the 70s. And now we're in the same situation, but instead of cartels, it's idealist paramilitary groups who are running the trade. Now, one thing that I will add, and this was in the POI before that didn't seem to be taken, is that if, you're obviously correct in saying that military intelligence improves every year. Right? But with that, hand in hand comes the improvement in the ability of the targeted groups to evade this intelligence. And if this were not the case, then the US would not have had issues in guerrilla warfare in like 3 different countries in the Middle East. The US would not be pulling away its armed forces right now in the Middle East if they were so all powerful and able to deal with any threat in the blink of an eye. And that's simply unrealistic. And that's why we do not think that the opening opposition case holds in that regard. I'll take your POI now, opening opposition.
If you're correct, that then these organizations are not even linked to drugs, I don't see how your case is even relevant to the debate. It doesn't change.
That's absolutely not what I said. That's a blatant mischaracterization. What I said is that they obtained the majority of their funding from the drug war, but their main purpose is not to run a drug business. It goes far beyond that, and it is political. And so the point is that if we legalize drugs, if we take away that source of income, then we no longer have to deal with the threat of armed, idealist political groups ravaging the country, ravaging society, and bringing death everywhere they go. And the point is, and I've said this before very clearly, they cannot be appeased. And that is the main difference between cartels and the groups that I'm telling you about. Now, finally, to conclude with my second unique extension, rehabilitation, if there is legalization across the board for any kind of drug, as opening government already defined, then there is also the possibility to implement government-run, publicly funded rehabilitation programs that people are not afraid to go to because it's no longer something that is stigmatized, and B, people can actually afford to go to because it's paid for by the government, and on top of that, they don't have to deal with the issue of facing consequences. And for everything that I've listed right now, we believe that opposition case does not hold, and that's why we're proud to propose. Thank you.
We thank that speaker for that speech. We now welcome the member of opposition to begin the case of closing opposition. Here.
Can you guys hear me, first of all? Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Could you just stop the watch and restart?
Yeah.
I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. All right. What I believe is happening in this debate so far is a huge characterization of Colombia. So my extensions will be, first of all, a little bit more characterization about Colombia, the infrastructures and the people inside Colombia who are probably going to fall to these drugs. And the second extension will be how will it impact crime organization, which known as, like we're talking about the cartels. Before that, one quick rebuttal to OG. So look, OG tells us that once we turn drugs legal, then we have more, we get two impacts. One is we can tax this money, and then we can earn as a country. So to that I say, look, we are talking about crime organization. We are talking about cartels. That means that these organizations could just as easily keep laundering money. And the impact that they are talking about is not that big because they won't earn that much of money. But let's take, even if we take them on their best side and the country will make money, we will explain why it is not important, as opposed to our case. The second thing of this exact same argument about turning them legal is they tell us, look, drugs now will be safer. Note why they tell us that they will be safer, because now there is more surveillance, and Colombia, the country will because of the surveillance, we can make them better and have better drugs. What we say is, look, Colombia is a very poor country. What does that mean? They have very, very weak infrastructures. That also applies about medical things. That also applies for research and etc. That means that we do not believe that the delta of taking these drugs and making them way much healthier is going to happen, because we are not talking about an European or American country who will improve the product so much better. It's not going to get FDA approval or something like that. Now, my rebuttals to CG will be all of the engagement will be within my points. Let's go to my points. So first thing, a little bit characterization, which I already started. Look, when we talk about Colombia, we need to remember two things. The first thing is Colombia is a very poor country. What does that mean? That means that the people themselves, many people are poor themselves. And the second thing is that we have very, very poor infrastructures in terms of undeveloped education system and etc. What does that mean? That means that the people who are likely to fall to drugs more these days are, first of all, we think poor people, because as already mentioned, we don't think that that's the core of the point. Poor people will get more drugs because it's more accessible, because it's more because it's cheaper, because now you can get it anywhere, because now it's legal. And the second group of people is teenagers who are pressured by their friends in parties and etc. Why is it important? Why is it important? Look, these groups of people, both the very poor ones and teenager, they are people who lack two things. The first thing is accessibility to services. What does that mean? If we're talking about a drug addict, it's very important that when he tries to recover or get better, he needs around him a lot of things. First of all, support system. Second thing is rehabilitation institution. Second thing is medical care. Third thing is Okay, these three is enough. So what we say is when we are talking about the poorest people in a poor country with a poor infrastructure, that means that they will exactly want to have all these things. This is why it's extremely dangerous. And the second thing is like specifically when we talk about teenagers, we are saying, look, these people like are like when you're talking about kids and teenagers, they can't make the rational decision. Why? Because they are pressured to take drugs by their friends, because they like can't think of it rationally and make the correct decision, because they don't have all of the information, because they don't understand the meaning to its fullest. So what we say is today we get more teenagers and more people, more poor people doing these drugs because it's way more accessible for them, because it's way cheaper. What are the impacts of this? Look, we are talking about, first of all, people losing their money for drugs. The second thing, and the most important thing, is health issues, right? Because of drugs, you can, first of all, literally die, right? By overdosing and simply by other health issues that you might get because of drug. You can also develop mental disorders, right? For example, wrong diet, because you now less care about yourselves once you are so addicted to drugs. Note that we are talking about all drugs, not just marijuana or something simple like this. We're talking about LSD, we're talking about heroin, we're talking about very, very, very tough and dangerous drug. And we're also saying that we're taking people's free choice. Why? Because once you took the drug and now you're addicted, now you have way more, now it's very, very difficult for you to get out of the cycle. Before I move on, let's take a PY from the second half. First half, yep.
Look, even if the cartels don't become fully legitimate companies like McDonald's or Coca-Cola, OG's main impact, which is stability for Colombia, still stands because the cartels will no longer need to fight over hidden land, resources, guns, and manpower.
Okay.
Have a more cost-efficient way to get these.
Thank you. That's exactly my next point. Let's talk about crime organization. Look, when we talk about the cartels, they don't only sell drugs. This is totally mischaracterization of the truth. The cartels and the crime organization does way more things than just selling drugs. What are these things? Murders, rapes, selling prescribed medications, selling drugs to other countries. What does that mean? That once we are legalizing only one part of these cartels, then this part is going to be like up on the surface and we can see it, but we still won't be able to see all these other things, right? What does that mean? That means that after we characterized why these cartels are going to have more customers, they are going to have more money because now more people buy from them and they have a wider market to sell it for. That means that once they have more customers, they earn more money, they actually could do more crimes than they used to before because now we fuel them with more resources. So let's summarize what I gave you in this debate. First of all, characterization of Colombia and the people within it. Who are the people who are likely to fall now after the motion is applied? And we're talking about teenagers, we're talking about poor people. I explained why exactly these people are the people who are less likely to get out of this cycle and stay in it, and explained why the crime organizations are just going to get stronger tomorrow. For all these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
All right, we thank that speaker for that speech. We now welcome the government whip to conclude the case of the closing government. Here.
I'm quickly going to grab a timer, if that's fine.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, phone work, please. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Dear panel, our side is obviously wrong because we give by far the largest impact regarding safety and just in general stability of the country. And I'm going to explain in some, firstly, I'm going to do some rebuttal and then I'm going to spend the majority of my case telling side by side why we won every single group here. Firstly, let's start with some rebuttal. They talk about how suddenly there's going to be a lot more people using drugs because it's more accessible, but we do not believe this argumentation. We think this is really weird. You're talking about the largest cocaine exporter in the entire world with rampant drug cartels, etc., apparently, who completely destabilize the nations, but at the same time, it's supposedly relatively hard to get drugs, or you have to put a lot of effort into it, which means children cannot get it.
We think this is incredibly illogical because inherently, if you have this much drug trade in your nation, in very poor neighborhoods, which apparently this is happening in, the chance of there being great police, as they themselves say, bad infrastructure, there's a lot of police presence there to actually combat any drug trade there is absolutely minimal. So in these poor neighborhoods, there's going to be drug trade on their side of the house anyway. We can actually limit this by, you know, making it legal, forcing them to stay out of these areas, forcing them to stay in establishments, which means it doesn't get to these people, which means there's maybe even less drug use on their side of the house. They do not engage with any of the points of why or my own points why this will lessen. Furthermore, they give the explanation that they want rehabilitation, they want all this good stuff, but at the same time, they say they don't have they have no infrastructure. We can actually bring infrastructure. We have already said by legalizing it, we can give rehabilitation, we can give actual opportunities to get out of addiction, which on their side of the house is completely non-existent. This falls on our side of the house, and it's a major impact because we can use, for example, tax money that we gain from legalizing it to fund these projects. They didn't have the money for it. Technion A, I guess, closing up.
Look, there is a consensus in this room that tomorrow drugs will be way cheaper than today. Don't you think that means that now drugs will be way more accessible to poor people in rural, in different places?
No, because inherently with drugs, them being you yourself say they're going to be forced into taking drugs and there's going to be a lot of peer pressure. So and you also say that these are highly addictive. So the moment you do take drugs due to peer pressure, because you don't randomly decide, oh, I'm just going to get some cocaine, you have some reasons for it. The moment you do take it, you're just going to get hooked on it and you're going to pay the price either way. These drug trades would not have dominated the world for decades with some of the largest cartels ever to exist if it was just, oh no, this is too expensive, we don't have the market for it. We think this is illogical. On our side of the house, the chance of ODing, as my speakers already said, is smaller because we can actually regulate that, the safety of drugs. And furthermore, as my speakers also said, crimes are a means to an end. They do not commit crimes just for the fun of it. They do it so that they can make their company work. Their company already works when we legalize it. This also falls. Moving on to why we win over every single side. We're starting with OG, of course, and we simply win over this because we have a far larger impact. They only analyze why cartels specifically will lessen or will become less dangerous. But as my speakers already explained, historically speaking and currently, cartels are not the biggest drug dealers in Colombia. By far, these are paramilitary groups with extremely dangerous motives, which also makes them far more dangerous and makes our argument far more impactful because we can genuinely limit a group of people whose only reason to exist is to hamper or damage society actively. These people are responsible for the absolute vast majority of every single political murder in Colombia. They continuously destabilize the murder far more than any cartel has ever done. Because of these reasons, we obviously take it over. And furthermore, we can also provide more stability than OG because, as we've already explained, there's extremely left-wing, extremely right-wing organizations. These guys clash regularly. There's been massive wars, essentially, between these groups because these simply do not have the resources anymore to wage war on such a massive proportion. The stability and the safety of the nation would just grow exponentially. We win this over OG. And then, as we've already explained, historically speaking, foreign intervention is an absolutely horrible idea. The war on drugs is the ultimate proof of this. Foreign intervention has only led to one of the biggest power vacuums in recent history, with the removal of Pablo Escobar and his rival gang. It has been taken over completely, now the vast majority, by extremely dangerous, extremely ideological groups that will, POIs please, that have devastated and will continue to devastate the nation if we do not actively work against them, which they cannot do. So, and they say that there's a form of stability that is able to be provided. We think we give far more stability than they ever could by legalizing it, by giving relatively legitimate companies the opportunity to trade in this instead of groups who've actively committed ethnical cleansing, remaining the most powerful group in this debate. And then on closing, we believe that closing, the majority has already essentially been rebutted, but just to be clear why we exactly win, even if we are to believe to some degree the argumentation of that a relatively small group, as I've already minimized in my rebuttal, will maybe start using drugs now, we on the other hand are able to provide the world with now Colombia with far more benefits than they ever could, because we are able to provide them with better education, for example, if we take tax money and put it into that, better any rehabilitation at all, which means that in the end, if you look at long term, we have far more opportunities for people to actually
Last
get
chance,
out of the
Oro.
horrible. Sure.
We gave you 3 mechanisms as to why people will use more drugs, because they are now not illegal, they're not afraid to be sent to jail. There is lots of advertising which causes people to think it is good, and it is cheaper, so more accessible.
I've already reacted to cheaper by saying that drugs are inherently extremely addictive. You've used it once, you're going to keep using it. The cost of it doesn't really matter because they're going to get addicted anyway. Advertisement, we can illegalize advertisement. It's not like drugs are a secret in Colombia that no one knows where to get drugs, and it's like you need to get underground. No, this is the largest drug trading nation in the entire world. We think drugs are highly accessible as of right now. And the first part was how I don't fully remember it, but I think it was something about how it's more accessible on the streets now because it's now legal. There's no real police intervention against these people in poor neighborhoods who are also the most common users of it, because they simply can't use because they can't do it because there's not enough police to actually enforce it, and the paramilitary groups are too strong there. They can't, in the status quo, they're not fighting to it adequately. So we do not see how any of these impacts do not apply to you if they were to be true. Please vote opposition.
All right, we thank that speaker for that speech. We now welcome the proposition speaker for that speech. We now welcome the opposition whip to conclude the closing opposition case and the debate at large.
Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Just a moment. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. Legalizing all drugs doesn't better Colombian enforcement power. It does not give better infrastructure in this country. We think that by fixing one thing or trying to fix one thing in cartels and in crime organization, it does not change anything else in those crime organizations. It does not change the enforcement, etc. And therefore, we think that government lost in the debate. Now, 3 clashes here. First, drug cartels. Their power is increasing. The second is about regulation. The third is about harming citizens. Before that, a few external rebuttals. So we get from OG that legalization, there'll be more rehab after legalization. So we really do not understand why. Government knows there are drugs. If they know that they can rehab today as well, like we have in many other countries where drugs aren't legalized, but we still have places of rehabilitation because government knows that it's important. Now, there is no reason for the rehab centers to be better tomorrow. And besides, you harm way more people with drugs. You think that it's better, maybe there will be better rehab if we just cause way more people to be addicted to very hard drugs. And you also say about never mind. So another thing about CG, they say that that cartels are now a minority of the drugs and of the crime organizations. So first, cartels are part of the crime organizations, and something that happened in the 70s does not necessarily mean that it will happen tomorrow the same way. Secondly, we understand that cartels will still have power tomorrow. If we have a law, and today they have power on all drugs, on all drug selling, it's unlikely that tomorrow they will just have no power, no money, no control of the drugs, no control of the fields and the companies that makes the drugs. We think that it's just unlikely, and this is exactly what Murad explains in his case. Now, and about the rehab, CG also talks about stigmatized and don't need to face consequences. We think that rehab centers in both sides of the house just don't force people who go to rehab to face consequences. They don't force them. They have psychologists, etc., and it's the same in both sides of the house. Now let's go to the first clash about drug cartels and their power when the power is increasing. So we get from OG that tomorrow they'll turn to legitimate businesses, and we honestly don't understand how, because they still have power of the drugs. The cartels will tomorrow still be a part of the market because they have this power. They also say that they are less using power and shooting and causing harm because the police helps them. So let's understand what we get from Muad in this case. First, first about that, they still have power. Second, they're about the like shooting and fighting between cartels. There's still competition in the market tomorrow. You say yourself that there will be a lot of companies. So we don't understand if there's still competition and there's still cartels in the market. Why would tomorrow they will magically change their type of fighting in the market? If they want to fight tomorrow and want to shoot, etc., they can still do it, even if it is legitimate or not. Besides that, what explains why there's not a lot of infrastructure, there's not a lot of enforcement, and therefore it is likely that they will still fight and harm citizens. Now, what do we get from Moad? Moad explains exactly why they will get more power tomorrow, because of the characterization of Colombia, because the cartels are can get more power because they have power of the market today, because even tomorrow they still contribute to crime organizations. Crime organizations can still get more money from prescribed medications. It can still do more crimes as murder, as raping, as harming people. And we think that for all those reasons, those cartels will just be bigger tomorrow because they have a power of the market, and because tomorrow the drugs will be just more accessible and will sell more. Now, what do we get from OO in this point of compare? OO say that you will need to limit drugs, that it's just not very important, because you still need to limit drugs in other countries, and therefore the cartel's power doesn't matter. But we understand that what happens in other countries is the same in both sides of the house. But if we show you that what happens in Colombia is very important and change a lot, because the cartels will have more power, because they will use this money to cause more crimes, we win OO in this clash. And this is exactly what I say, because they don't talk about Colombia in this clash at all. They just say you don't limit drugs in other countries, so this is not good enough. Now let's move, before moving to the second clash, OG.
Look, cartels' major crimes like murder only happen because this is the only way for them to save their drug business. We show why they will have less reasons to commit them, and why the biggest incentive for Colombia is...
Please stop. Okay. The reason crime organizations murder or do crimes is not for their drugs, is for the crime organizations. The reason for them to use to join this organization is to go against the law, is to do something that is prohibited, is to do all those things. If they wanted only the money from drugs, they don't have to do all those other crimes, selling all kinds of other things, raping people. We don't think that's likely. We think that this is exactly the opposite. And because they get more money from drugs, they can just get resources to do other crimes. Now, the second clash is about regulation. We get from OG that the government and companies want to regulate healthier, and there'll be healthier drugs. Now, how do we explain better than OO? How do we rebut it better than OO? Because OO talks about addicted people that will buy anything. But Moad explains why even these new people that OO agrees that there will be more people consuming drugs tomorrow. What explains why those people just won't really get regulation, because there isn't real infrastructure, there isn't really regulation in Colombia because of how it's built. And we explain, even if OO talks about the long term and how the long term will have regulation, we explain why in the short term, above OO, we will have so much damage to those people who will buy drugs with no real regulation. Now to the third clash about harming citizens. We explain better than OO how do we harm people who use drugs. OO just says more accessible, but we explain why specifically poor and teenagers. We give more analysis about people who are very poor, who really couldn't buy this until yesterday, teens who are under pressure, and it is legitimate for them to use the drugs tomorrow. We have more impact, like mental illnesses, like teens who have mental harm in the future. And we explain why it's more important, because they are so poor, because they're so dependent on money. They don't have a person to depend on, and they are all alone in the world. Using drugs is very bad for them. For all those reasons, very proud to oppose.
All right. We thank that speaker for that speech, and we thank you all for that very entertaining debate. You should cross over, shake hands